Welcome to the Sunshine Travelers podcast. Today we're sharing a side of travel that doesn't always make the highlight reel, the untold stories. These are the funny, unexpected, and sometimes not so glamorous moments that happen when you're out exploring the world. From travel mishaps and embarrassing encounters to the kind of stories that make us laugh now, but maybe not so much in the moment when they happen, we're pulling back the curtain on the real side of travel. So sit back, relax, and get ready for a lighthearted episode filled with adventures, laughs, and a reminder that sometimes the best stories are the ones that you didn't plan for. I'm Scott.
And I'm Melissa.
And we're the Sunshine Travelers. Our passion is travel and sharing our experiences with those who enjoy it as much as we do, or those who want to learn more about travel, or even those who just want to live vicariously through our travel stories. No matter where you fall along that journey, get ready to hear about our first-hand experiences as we visit some of the most interesting and amazing places on Earth. Today's episode's a little bit different. It's going to be a lot of fun, I hope. Melissa and I realized that there are so many stories from our travels that we have never shared with you before. And these are the moments that didn't always make the podcast. And sometimes we even said, oh, maybe we should leave those stories out. And they're the ones that we kind of laugh about now, or maybe even cringe a little bit when we talk about them. And this is what really happens when things don't go as planned.
Yeah, so we are titling this episode Travel Stories We've Never Told. But we may end up telling something that we may have alluded to, right? It's like when somebody's telling you a story and they're like, you've already told me this story before. But that's okay. Hopefully we'll put a different spin on it, but I know a few of these 100% that we haven't shared that we just wanted, have a little fun today and share them with you.
Yeah. Well, let's start out with one of our most recent stories. And you've heard us talk about the safari and how much we loved our experience on the safari. It's one of the best things that we've ever done. But getting into Kenya was a little bit rocky, and we never told that story.
Yeah. So when we were leaving Egypt, so we did take a lot of, we had a lot of camera equipment, no drone. So by the way, no drones in, no Egypt. I don't think you could take them in Kenya either. So we knew going into this, like there was no drones, and they were very picky. I don't think going into Egypt, they didn't even stop us, right? But coming out, then they were very picky about what's in this box. And we had to remember that? He said, point to this, or he said, point to this and tell me what these things are. And I was over there and I was like, oh my gosh, this is all Scott stuff. I don't know what all this stuff is. So fine, no problem. Fine. We got through that. We get to Kenya. We get through customs. We even have a guy, that was part of the experience that we had with McKay. The guy met us at the airport, after we came through immigration, help us with our bag, which is not something that we're used to. So all this is great until
we get to the customs. And so they pull the camera case, and obviously I'm thinking,
well, before you say that, let's explain. This was a little different. A lot of times when you go through customs, they have a conveyor belt where I guess sometimes, and we may have run into this sometimes you run the stuff across and sometimes you don't. So this was after you collect your bag. And so then everything was going across that conveyor. Carry-ons, which is what your camera equipment was. You did not check that. Carry-ons, everything was going through this conveyor. Okay, now keep going.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty common.
Yeah.
In other areas of the world. But anyhow, we run it through the conveyor, and I am certain, because he pulls out the camera case, I've got all my camera equipment in a Pelican case. And if you don't know what that is, it's a hard-sided case, and it's got little slots in there for all of your equipment to keep it safe while traveling. And so he pulls it out, and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that's my camera equipment. And I'm thinking I'm just going to do the same thing. He's going to point and ask me what certain things are, and I'll tell him, what it is. Well, I do that, and all of a sudden he's like, oh no, you can't bring this into the country. I've got to pay some kind of fee to bring this equipment in. And I was just like, you got to be kidding me. Every second person going through here has probably got a lens that's worth more than the value of all of my camera equipment put together. and they're going to stop me on, just my little bag of camera equipment here. And so they were serious. They were not going to let us in with that camera equipment. And so we did have to get on the phone with McKay. And of course, they sprung into action right away. And they were telling them, look, we're going to come down there. But if we have to come down there, there's going to be a problem. And so you need to figure this out before we get down there. And so we stood around. We talked to a few guys. I was kind of fuming about the fact that they had pulled this aside. And one thing that I learned is, never tell them the actual value of anything. Always lowball the value. But, what he was saying is I needed some kind of bond saying that I was going to take this camera equipment in, use it for my personal use, and then making sure that I brought it back out, or else I was going to have to pay taxes on it.
We were, like you said, we were talking to our little handle guy, Thomas. I kind of befriended this other man who had a lot of questions about the U.S. His daughter had moved to the U.S. and she was like working so that she could then study. And so we kind of like struck up a conversation. And I think in the end, he was the one who kind of smoothed it over with the other guy who, I don't know, did he just want to be like the in charge guy of the day to say this was this? Did he want money? We don't know, but
they told Thomas, right? That was his name.
Mm-hmm.
Or Thomas overheard or something like that. He was like, I think they just want you to pay some money. And I think he told that to the people from McKay, and they're like, no, we're not going to do that. The economy here is so heavily dependent upon this tourism and the tourism for safaris specifically that they just can't treat our guests like this.
Yeah. And like you said, it's, it wasn't like here's a consistent process. Here's a consistent, because what we had was nowhere near the value of what other people had. So,
that's just one of those stories where it was our first experience in country and, you're already getting a little bit of a shakedown at the airport. But, sometimes that does happen. And we've had that in Mexico.
We did tell that story.
Yeah. We've had the shakedown by the police in Mexico, and we've told that story before. And you just kind of have to be, calm about it, stay level-headed, and then work your way through these situations.
Take a deep breath. And it probably did not set us back. It's not like we had anywhere to be, but that was an overnight flight. We were kind of tired and wanted to get in and get settled and all that kind of stuff. So just, trying to keep a level head. But just now, the benefit or the outcome of this is, even though it wasn't McKay's fault, I think that they were very gracious and apologetic and a little upset that this had happened to us. And so at the end, we got treated with a very nice little, private flight to kind of say, hey, we value you and we're sorry that this happened. And, they were able to work that out for us. So that was a little silver lining, I guess. And that was all thanks to Mark, who took very good care of us. And you'll be hearing from Mark very soon on the podcast.
Well, the next thing on our list is when we rented the car in Crete. So if you listened to last week's episode, we talked about the van in Crete. I told the story about having to go with the guy to get the van. And, who's like, only one person can go. And we didn't know what we were getting into, but that part worked out. What we haven't talked about is actually trying to maneuver that van in the cities there in Heraklion and Hanaya. We're talking about it was a minivan. It was a smaller minivan, but it was still a minivan-sized vehicle. And the streets are barely made for a compact-sized vehicle to travel through.
Yeah. And people would park, and they were not one-way streets. People would park on both sides. Then cars were trying to go in both directions. And then you would try to go into some kind of parking lot. Like that was just like a maze of another dimension up a hill with people parking all over the place.
Well, the place that we stayed in Hanaya, we had this brand new van. We talked about that, maybe 20 miles on it when we picked it up. And so the place that we stayed, we had to park down underneath the apartment building. And just trying to maneuver it around in that underground parking was a chore in and of itself. and this thing's a stick shift, right? So we've talked about this before, is that sometimes, or a lot of times when you go outside the US and you rent a car, it's going to be a manual transmission. Anyhow, one day they came and got me and said, hey, there's a car parked right at the top of the road. We can't get the van out of the driveway. And so you had to go up this steep hill and then make a very sharp turn right, because this was a one-way street, to get out of that parking lot. And someone had parked right on the edge of the driveway.
Yeah. So basically you just had to like close your eyes. Just kidding. Not really close your eyes, but literally gun it. But with that car there, like you couldn't go straight because then there would be cars like straight in front of you. So like you had to be able to get to the top and make that right hand.
No, there
turn.
weren't cars.
There were cars on the other side. Okay. There was like metal.
Yeah. It was a metal gate. It was like a cast iron gate that they had built into the sidewalk
to keep you off the sidewalk.
Yeah, keep people from parking over there on that side. And so anyhow, trying to make that turn, I just kind of gunned it because the van would stall out. They're the smallest 4-cylinder engines that you can get. So you already had a lack of power to get up that hill. And then you had the issue with the car, and I didn't see those gates. And I just ran that van all up over one of those cast iron gates.
And if you heard about, we talked a lot about this trip in the Europe trip with families, and I'll link that. But Brady was on that trip with us, and he was actually very relieved that you had hit that, because I had actually hit it earlier and he didn't want to tell me. And I had scraped up that brand new, the very front bumper of that brand new. And he was just like, oh, thank goodness. Now I don't have to, because then you had scraped it up. So he was actually like, oh, and you have said several times, moral of the story is, like, if you don't need a vehicle that size, get something smaller, because most people ride mopeds, right? Or very, very, very small cars. Now, it wouldn't have done for us to have 2 vehicles. Like, that would have just been a pain. I want to go, what do you think the slope of that driveway, like the grade of that driveway?
Oh, I don't know. It's 10-15%, it seems like. So yeah, you couldn't see over the front of the vehicle because it was pointed straight up in the air.
Yeah. So quite an adventure. So just be prepared for that. If you don't know how to drive a stick shift, like when you reserve it, say, I've got to have, an automatic.
And so this kind of points back, though, some of the reasons why I didn't enjoy Crete as much as you guys did. Because you got outside of the cities and went to all those beaches and kind of the more open roads and stuff like that. A lot of my experience was in those cities and having to deal with those type of issues. And so Crete is somewhere that I have zero interest in ever returning to.
The other thing that I would say is that it was actually like having that garage, though, was actually such a rarity. Like those people that own that penthouse own that garage, but most places didn't have it. And where we stayed in Heracleon, like you just had to find street parking or go to a lot and pay, or go to a garage and pay. There was a couple of times, or actually a lot of the time we got really lucky with street parking, but they didn't have parking around the apartment, I guess I should say, that we rented there. There was no parking that belonged to that, at least that, that we could use. So
it was funny because the day that we were leaving, we had left the vehicle down below while we went and grabbed lunch or something like that downtown. And so we had walked back to get the van. And when we did, someone was parked in front of the driveway. And I was like, no, you can't park there. I said, you've got to move. And the guy came out and said, well, I own this apartment building. And I was like, oh, okay.
We're like, oh, it's wonderful. We loved it. It was great. Because we dealt with like the property manager. And then they would just happen to meet us there. So, yeah, that was a little awkward, wasn't it?
I thought I was going to have to whoop that guy, though. I was like, no, you can't park there. Well, let's talk a little bit about snorkeling, because we've had some hit or misses with snorkeling as well.
Yeah, so we wanted to specifically point out there was a couple of times we talked at length about, the snorkeling and different places to snorkel in the episodes where we talked about Aruba and Curacao. But I think what we probably didn't share as much was that you really had to be mindful of the current. And I think I wanted to back up before we share a couple of those stories. And it really was kind of front and center in our mind. There was one time in the Galapagos Islands when we were snorkeling and everything, was fine. And then all of a sudden it was like very hard to swim. It got very like windy and choppy. And our guide there was like, okay, everybody, like we're getting back to the boat now. We're getting out. It just basically wasn't safe. And unfortunately, a couple of months after we actually did that trip, we heard from somebody who was on the trip with us. She was actually like our cabin stewardess who helped take care of everything. She actually passed away in a snorkeling incident. And so I think after that, we just became a little bit more mindful of just being cautious and how much it can change. And the wind can be very strong in Curacao and Aruba. So there were a couple of times that we snorkeled in Curacao, and I never felt like super like anxious that we couldn't get back, but needing to be a strong swimmer. I think that after that, we did say, okay, from now on, we're going to take flippers. We have gotten to where we don't really take flippers when we didn't, need them or whatever. But then I wanted to kind of go back. There was one instance when we did go to one particular beach that our guy that we did one of the tour with in Aruba had told us to go to. There was a shipwreck, and the shipwreck that we had seen in Curacao was just very neat. And he said, well, this one's a little bit further out. And so we started out, but then we noticed very quickly that it got very, very rough. And I got to the sandbar and I was like, you know what? It's almost so rough that if I get out there, like, I just didn't want to panic. And I think just having those few things, as I stayed on the sandbar and worried about you the rest of the time. You made it out to that, but then it was very difficult.
Yeah, I was really tired by the time I got back in. And matter of fact, we had that one time when we were at a different beach, we were swimming along that rock wall, and you couldn't tell the current was really strong taking you out. I guess you could have said, oh, it was so easy to swim that, that's what it was. But then we came back and we had to go, I don't know, a quarter of a mile or so, and then a really strong outward current, and had to swim against that. And it's like, and if you let up, you were going to get taken right back out. And so, I don't know, for like 20 minutes, we had to just give it our all out swim. And by the time we got up on the shore, I think we were dead. We were like, we're done for the day, no more. But then it kind of ticked you off because we had seen a guy who was diving down below us. And so evidently he was below the current, and he just kind of went whoop, right underneath and popped up right on the shoreline. And so when we're talking about a destination, we don't necessarily tell all of the detractors, if you will, when we're talking about it, because most of the time they're very minor, and compared to the rest of the trip, everything's great. But in this case, when you're out there swimming, just make sure, because we do talk a lot about snorkeling. So when you go to these places that we talk about and you go out and you want to go snorkeling, make sure you're paying attention to things like the currents and the rip currents and stuff like that. And don't put yourself into a dangerous situation.
Yeah. I would say, that's why it's always important, like, to be out there with somebody. But in this case, like, I couldn't have helped you. I don't know that you could have helped me, right? That we both had to be really strong swimmers and just kind of like be on our own, right? So I guess just, being aware of that and not pushing past your limits. And like you said, watch the weather and because obviously, like from the story in the Galapagos, this is somebody who is very familiar with the place, with other people, strong swimmer, I'm sure, but things do happen. And so just being aware of that, because it could take a situation, you're in a beautiful tropical destination on vacation, somewhere like Aruba and Curacao, and turn that into tragedy. So,
yeah. What even influenced our decision in the Grand Cayman is we wanted to go to that one shipwreck, but we saw that the waves were crashing near that shipwreck, and we were like, no, it's just too rough, and that would make it too dangerous.
Yeah, that's true. It's just nothing is worth the risk. So this next one was just something just really, really interesting. So several years ago, we had the opportunity to visit Stonehenge. So I actually have a couple of little things about this, but we had gotten there, and this was in the time, this was, pre-COVID. And I think things are kind of getting back this way now to where you don't necessarily have to have timed entries to everything and stuff like that. So this was the case with Stonehenge. We were just like, okay, we're just going to show up, buy our ticket, and go in. come to find out, I think it was on a weekend. Come to find out, we got there. Lines are super, super long. So real quick tip about that is that I always kind of try to find a way. They had like their members entrance or something like that. Knew we were going to a couple of other places. So I went there and she's like, sure, if you buy this English Heritage Pass, you get like skip the line entry. And so I'm like sold because I didn't want to, stand in line for an hour just to get into Stonehenge. So we are there and we're just kind of walking around, and lo and behold, there is a famous, I don't know, what would you call it? Politician? I don't know. Is he a dignitary or politician?
Yeah, I mean, he's the former Speaker of the House.
Oh, okay. There you go. From the United States, like walking around, but he was also from Georgia. So it was somebody that you sort of knew, had a connection with.
Yeah. So as a kid, my dad was in politics, local politics. And I remember going up to the U.S. Capitol, and we met with Newt Gingrich because Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House at the time. And my dad was trying to get some help on a local project that, they were doing and stuff like that. And so I had the opportunity to meet him there, and he took us on a tour of the Capitol and then the tunnels underneath, stuff like that. No way he had any clue who I was, right? Because he does this, he did this like every day of his time in Washington. But it was just interesting. I looked over and, he walks up, and he had just written a couple of books at the time and stuff like that. And so I would say just kind of always keep your eyes peeled because you never know who you're going to see.
And you actually spoke to him.
Yeah.
Right? They came right by where we were. And so you were like.
Yeah, I just told him, I said, we're from Georgia and wanted to say hello. And so, we had a few minutes to talk to him, and, he was walking around seeing Stonehenge as well. But it's funny because there are some people that are really recognizable to you, but I don't see these people all the time. Like, I never see any famous people in the airport, but my brother, on the other hand, he can't go to the airport without running into somebody, or he sits next to somebody on the plane and he's like, oh, I, struck up a conversation with so-and-so. And it's like, how did you even know who they were?
But especially in London, we also didn't run into or speak to, but Samuel L. Jackson one time going through Piccadilly. We saw him. We were like, oh, that's got to be Samuel L. Jackson. And he is really tall. I mean, I think most people probably know that, but we're just like, he is really tall.
Yeah, there was no doubt that was Samuel L. Jackson.
So anyway, that's a good point. So just when you're traveling, airports and on the plane, and keep your eyes peeled.
The only other person that I have run into in the airport that I knew who they were is this barbecue chef named Myron Mixon. I was on the plane train there at the Atlanta airport, and it was kind of easy to figure out who he was because he had his name on his shirt. But, I recognized who he was. And then I think there was one other time where Jeff Foxworthy was on the plane train as well. And I saw him. Didn't talk to him because I wasn't sure. But then I heard other people around me whispering like, hey, I think that's Jeff Foxworthy. And so
keep your eyes peeled when you're traveling, especially. You never know who you're going to get to see. So the next one is kind of like I don't know, just like be aware, right, when you're traveling. And I don't think we told the story. I kind of told the story on Instagram, I think one time in a video. But when we visited the Trevi Fountain in Rome, this was one of those things where we're like, when we first get here and after we like kind of, have a relaxing afternoon so we can get acclimated, we went and walked around and did some things like seeing the piazzas and going to the Spanish Steps and the Trevi Fountain. And so you're just kind of like, getting into the swing of things. And of course, so this guy comes up and he was like, oh, I'll take your picture for €1. It's the Polaroid, whatever. And you don't really want it. But he's already taken it like before you can even like know what's going on. Well, so then though, after it comes out, then he wanted
€10.
€10 for it. Right. And I think it was two Polaroids or something. He wants €10 for it. And then, of course, then he's just going to haggle you and hassle you. And it's just it's just frustrating when you're traveling to kind of, have to deal with that, I guess. And it can happen in a lot of touristy places. So just know that we actually ended up, I don't know, did we end up paying that or haggling for him for like $5? Like you feel bad for them and they've used their Polaroid, but you really shouldn't. whatever. So I think we ended up giving him something for him. I still do have the pictures, so it's a fun little memento, but just know that you can walk away and they'll keep haggling you and whatever, but just being aware, I guess, of that. And then just, if that's just clearly saying, no, I'm not interested.
Yeah, but you were taking food off his kids' plates by not paying him.
There you go. Yeah.
Let's talk about something we all need, but you may not realize it. Online privacy. When you're traveling, you might want to conserve your data plan and connect to the hotel's Wi-Fi, or you're at a coffee shop and you need to check your email, bank account, or just want to scroll social media while you sit there and enjoy your cup of coffee. What you may not realize is that public Wi-Fi connection isn't secure, and the bad guys can get access to your passwords and other information. You need to install ExpressVPN, or Virtual Private Network. When you use ExpressVPN, your internet traffic goes through an encrypted tunnel that no one can see into, including hackers, governments, and your internet service provider. So now you can log in, scroll, and stream without worrying about the bad guys snatching your private information. I've been using it for years to protect my online privacy, and you should too. Go to sunshinetravelers.com/ExpressVPN to learn more and get 3 months free with a yearly plan, plus their 30-day money-back guarantee.
Our last little story that we wanted to tell is something that Scott, I don't know, I think you ended up telling a lot of people. I remember you telling, when we were with Manal in Egypt, telling her about this. So I'll let Scott tell you. Well, I guess I should say, a lot of times Scott will say, yeah, but have you ever been kidnapped on a safari in India? Or, some prefacing it, something like that. So anyway, that's his. So I'm going to let him tell it.
Yeah, so I have a very unique experience. And my friend Tammy, who's been on our show before talking about Aruba, she's the one that has been, a dozen times or more to Aruba, loves it. But she and I worked together. And we had gone to India, and we were there for several weeks, and we had handlers with us the whole time. And these were people who just kind of watched after us, made sure that, everything was good. They would take us around. They'd make sure that we had good places to eat where we wouldn't get sick. They'd make sure that, if we went out to do some sightseeing on the weekend, they'd make sure that we were going somewhere that was safe, or when people would come up, they would kind of shush them away and keep them away from you. And so one weekend in the middle, they were like, hey, we have to go home this weekend because we were in a different city from where they lived. And they were like, but you're staying, and we were in Bangalore. They're like, you're in one of the finest hotels in all of India. And we were at the Leela Palace in Bangalore, and that place is fantastic. And they were like, there's nothing that you need to go outside of the hotel for. They have everything that you could want right here. Just stay in the hotel, relax. They've got a spa, they've got the pool, they've got restaurants here. There's no need for you to leave this hotel at all. And so, we were like, okay. And so Saturday morning we get up and we meet downstairs for breakfast. And Tammy, we're sitting there at breakfast. She was like, so what are we going to do today? And the first thing that came out of my mind was, we should go on a safari. So number one, I broke the rule, don't leave the hotel. And so anyhow, we went. I asked the concierge, I was like, hey, we want to go on a safari, because I think my brother had been on one just a few months before in a town outside of Bangalore where he would go for work. And so I was like, we should see if we could do this. And they were like, oh, yeah, you could go to the Bangalore Zoo. They have a safari that's attached to it. And, it drives you through and you'll see all the animals and stuff like that. So we did. And we get there and we go and buy our tickets. And the tickets aren't much. They're like $4 or $5, per person to go on the safari. And we should have known when we get on the bus, the only 2 seats that were available on this safari bus were the best seats in the whole thing. And it's like, So they had waited for us to come, and they kept those 2 seats available. And so, we went on the safari. It was great. I had taken my camera, and the driver would get my camera every once in a while, and he'd lean outside of his window, and, he was taking like really up close photos of tigers and stuff like that. And so at the end, we had just said we should give him a nice tip. And I think we tipped him like $20 or something like that. Remember, the tickets were like $4. And so as we're trying to get off, the guide backs himself up against our seat and empties off the bus. And the driver's like, "You're Americans, you have more money than this." And we're like, "No, we gave you $20. We're not going to give you any more." Well, they hurry everybody off the bus, close the door, and start to try to leave. And so at that point, it was kind of I had to make a decision of what we're going to do. And so I stood up and I slammed the guy over that was blocking us as hard as I could against the windows on the other side. And the bus driver slammed on brakes. And so when he did, I just grabbed Tammy and we busted open the bus door and jumped off. But, it was a situation where we had gone somewhere that we were advised not to not leave the hotel. We'd gone out there without a handler, and we had kind of, we stood out in this place. And so we put ourselves in this position, and it's why often when we're talking about going to some of these places, Melissa and I will recommend is you probably want to have a guide in these places. Like, we wouldn't recommend anyone just show up in Cairo and try to go and guide themselves. I think that would be a mistake. India is definitely one of those places you don't just show up and maneuver around on your own. You can do it, and I'm sure people do, every day, but I wouldn't recommend it to you.
And so there you have it. Scott's famous safari kidnapping story.
As much of a safari as it was at the Bangalore Zoo, but I know that guy woke up with a nasty headache the next day.
So 10 out of 10, don't recommend.
Yeah, don't recommend. Matter of fact, we couldn't even enjoy the zoo itself because we were like, we got to get back, before something else happens to us. Well, we hope you enjoyed hearing some of our untold stories, those funny, unexpected, and less than glamorous moments that remind us travel isn't always picture perfect, but it is always memorable. So whether you're laughing with us or relating to a mishap of your own, we love sharing these behind-the-scene moments with you. If you've got a travel story you've never told or one that you just have to share, send me an email, scott@sunshinetravelers.com, and share your travel stories with us. We love hearing from you. We hope you enjoyed this episode and found some inspiration to help you with your travel journeys. If you could take a moment to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform, it would be greatly appreciated. Your 5-star reviews help us get discovered by others and possibly featured on your favorite platform. Don't forget to follow or subscribe to our podcast to get notified of new episodes as they are released. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook at Sunshine Travelers Podcast. Remember that as travelers with one L, most importantly, please share it with your friends to help them catch the travel bug. You never know, they may become your greatest travel companion.